Hi, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, COVID-19, How to Ensure Your Nonprofit Survival. Today, we're going to share some awesome tips on how to navigate this funding environment and not only survive COVID-19, but thrive. Today, we have myself, Shavonn Richardson. I'm founder of Get.Grants.Better Consulting. We support nonprofit organizations that are focusing on women, children, health, and education. I am here with Viveka, Bizzell-Palmer, and LaKeesha, Morris-Moreau, that will introduce themselves and give you a little more information on what they're presenting today. We will start with LaKeesha. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. I am LaKeesha Morris-Moreau. I'm the president and CEO of Bell Tower Consulting Group. We are based in Miami, Florida. We started in 2009. I have about 18 years of experience in the nonprofit field. Right now, my focus is on services for units of local government, counties, cities, townships. And last year, we celebrated 10 years, and we were happy to cross the threshold of $60 million in funding back to the local community. Thank you for being here.
Hi, I'm Viveka Bizzell-Palmer with Politicare. We are a public affairs and social impact and activation firm working in cross-sectionally with those in the nonprofit industry, as well as those in government, corporate America, as well as with social impact leaders. Today, my conversation with you will be about COVID-19. We will be discussing business continuity plans, communication, and just overall thinking about how you want to plan in response to the COVID-19.
Okay, thank you, ladies, for that introduction. So now we're going to get into talking about the current climate and really talking about how COVID-19 not only impacts nonprofit organizations, but also other stakeholders as well. And so we're going to get started with LaKeesha Morris-Moreau, who's going to talk about just FEMA and some impacts on the state and local governments. And then we'll have Viveka start shortly thereafter. LaKeesha?
Governor's desk. The governors have April, May at the latest to have those signed. We want to know, are the legislative appropriations that we've put in and requested and the grants that we've submitted last year, are they going to survive the veto pen? Are we going to be able to get that funding? You want to know that, so you want to start to track that, and we'll see what happens, what these governors decide. Because at the end of the day, the reality is that all of the money that has gone into taking care of COVID, it has to come from somewhere, and we have to recover and we start to balance those budgets. So that's the second thing, the state budgets. The third thing that I'm looking at is many states are still recovering from past disasters. So there is a big funding pot that is coming down, especially here in Florida, but 13 other states are affected starting in the summertime. And that is the CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Mitigation Funding. In Florida, that's $533 million that are coming into this community for mitigation, disaster mitigation efforts. And they want to have a regional impact. So what I'm looking at now is, what is that application going to look like when it comes in? The first round of municipalities, I believe it's about 12 of them. Those 12 states had to have their mitigation plan submitted to HUD by February 3rd, and HUD is now in the process of looking at all of those mitigation plans, approving them so that those states can move to the portion of releasing those requests for proposals. So that's the third thing that I'm looking at now. And a little bit later, we'll talk about what you all can do to start to prepare yourself to get some of that funding when it comes in, especially if you are in one of those affected states. And the CDBG mitigation funding is a result of disasters in 2016 and 17, Hurricane Irma, Hurricane Michael, those types of disasters. So right now, the states are like Florida, the Carolinas, Texas area, they may have some funding coming in. And then additional states are going to be rolled out throughout the year until all of the states that have been affected by a declared disaster in 2016 and 2017 have received their pot of funding. So that's the third thing that I'm looking at: FEMA funding, state budgets, and CDBG mitigation funding.
Okay. Thank you, LaKeesha, for that overview. And again, LaKeesha will follow up with her strategies towards the end of the webinar. Now we'll have Viveka go over her overview of how COVID-19 is affecting nonprofit organizations and similar entities. Viveka?
So I can tell you guys that I thought about quite a different ways we could kind of address kind of moving forward with COVID-19. And the truth of the matter is that there are so many nonprofits right now in the same situation. So it's really helpful for you to do a little bit of scenario planning and then contingency planning. So I think the first thing that I want to kind of talk to us about is how we can seize those promising opportunities that may still be available out there that LaKeesha kind of talked about, as well as kind of planning for worst case scenarios, i.e. significant funding cuts, sudden loss of leadership that may happen as a result of that, i.e. workforce planning, succession planning, et cetera. So the first thing I want you to do is kind of think about how you're going to identify the key factors. Think about factors that are, identify factors that are critical to the organization's success, that are uncertain and even unpredictable. There's some of us that are in positions where we have government funding. You may have to think about whether or not those funding streams are still gonna flow. I've been on the line with several clients this week. They've talked about contingency plans. Some of those grants have certain parameters that you guys know that you have to kind of meet. We wanna make sure that we kind of create a checklist, what may or may not come in terms of funding sources. From there, we need to start looking at possible outcomes and implications that those things may happen. Identify the likely range of outcomes and scenarios for given situations such as COVID-19 and kind of develop a strategy for that. You don't want to sit back and just kind of let things happen. I say be very proactive in your approach to whatever it is that you see your organization is going to face the challenges. Analyze and identify the best path forward. We want to think about all the options, how we could respond to coronavirus and make any appropriate adjustments to even your tactic or your strategies. And then weigh in those pros and cons from those. It's really important that we think about, situations such as investments, initiatives, postponing some of those, figuring out, talking to some of our suppliers, our vendors, as well as some of those foundation grants that we're currently, working with to kind of just figure out, what we may want to prioritize versus what we need to protect. I also want us to kind of think about codifying some triggers and some scenarios. Decide what circumstances will lead the organization to make the best in the next outcome that's going to be better for you. For example, if you have, you may have revenues that are going to fall by 10%, then you need to make some adjustments there. It's very likely that everybody is in a scenario, especially with social distancing, such a priority within our country and obviously all over the world, that you may, have social enterprise pieces to your nonprofit. You may want to think about what that looks like. I'm telling a lot of my nonprofits to think about three things: communications, programming, and then financials. Think about those scenarios and how you may want to kind of do some scenario planning, contingency planning on that respect to ensure that you're ready. And then last thing, which I think is just kind of what everyone is doing right now, monitoring the environment. Just kind of keeping check, being vigilant about what we were doing in terms of looking at what's coming on. As LaKeesha said, there are lots of legislation that's come down the pipeline that may be available for each one of the nonprofits. You have to make sure that we are being vigilant because everyone in the entire country is likely going through a scenario. Funding sources may be limited. So we want to make sure that we are, definitely paying attention. And I'll kind of share a little bit more a little bit later on with that from those pieces as well.
Okay, thank you, Viveka. And I will kind of share my thoughts on the big picture, right? And kind of the approach I'm taking is really thinking about and talking about the economy, how things like COVID-19 can disrupt the economy, and how that will impact nonprofit organizations. And so in general, the economy is cyclical. We have good years, we have bad years, we have bad months, we have good months. And a recession would be 2 consecutive quarters of, bad quarters, right? And so I say all this to say, we have to prepare for cyclical changes, and events like COVID-19 or even 9/11 or any other catastrophic event disrupts the system even more. So as nonprofit organizations, you will always need to be in a situation of preparing for those cyclical changes, but also being prepared when those major disruptors happen. So for example, where we are as far as COVID-19, businesses are being impacted. Businesses are closing. Businesses are having to kind of change the way they do business. If you're looking at the airline industry or the cruise industry or your favorite restaurant down the street, you're no longer able to go and sit at a restaurant, but you're now limited to just doing takeout, which for a business, even though they're still producing revenue through takeout orders, it's not the same revenue that they were producing before when you were able to sit in a restaurant. And because of social distancing, that has impacted how they're operating. These impacts decrease the amount of revenue that businesses bring in. When you don't have the same revenue that's coming in, now you have to lay people off, and now employment's going to go up. And you guys might have known that we've already reached our record as far as unemployment claims. So now we're in a position where we don't have people that are working. When people are not working, they spend less money. They go into a conservation mode. And of course, we can speak about that on an individual level or on a nonprofit level. This means people are not as likely to give because they are just trying to make it to the next week, the next grocery trip to the grocery store, just trying to make it to the next month to pay their mortgage. So these people and donors, individual donors specifically that you were engaging before, may not have that same capacity to give like they were giving before. And so as nonprofit organizations, and I'll propose some strategies towards the end, but as nonprofit organizations, you have to prepare for a decrease in revenue, not just because of COVID-19, but also because of just regular cyclical changes that happen just in general. Now, this also impacts the government, funders, and also the federal government. The way that it impacts corporations, again, going back to the example of businesses no longer bringing in as much revenue as they would before, they're spending less because they're trying to do the same thing. They're trying to conserve money. So this means that they're not going to be investing in the corporate sponsorships, the corporate giving that they were doing before. They're going to cut back on that. But it's a good thing and a bad thing to that, right? They're going to cut back or consider cutting back going forward, speaking of maybe future budgets. But as far as the budget for this year, the budget for 2020, that has already been approved and those dollars have already been set. And so for this year, as far as corporate dollars, that money is not going anywhere. But the bad news is now we have more people competing for those dollars and more special projects that maybe when the budget was made, the corporation wasn't thinking about COVID-19. But now they might have this special project and they're like, oh, we want to do this. Let's take it from our corporate giving budget. So now that's something that that may come up where there's less dollars available. And now you have more organizations competing for the same dollars because they're all in the same boat. Another good thing is this $2 trillion package that was approved by the federal government this morning is an incentive for businesses to maintain the status quo. So with that, they may still continue the same level of operations. They may still continue the level of giving, but the outcome of that is still to be determined. No one exactly knows what businesses will do. As far as foundations, now, most of you already know when foundations have money to give, it's just not sitting in cash. A lot of them have it invested in some sort of investment. A lot of them have endowments that are in the market. And so when the market is bad, like where we are now with the Dow being so low, the investment accounts are not generating the same returns that they were generating before. So the expectation would be that giving from from foundations is not going to be the same. However, there is a slight exception. Community foundations are still giving, but they're just giving differently. Some of them are now establishing specific grants for nonprofit organizations impacted by COVID-19 to help keep their doors open. Others are also kind of maybe narrowing their focus, but expanding their dollars in areas like basic need, food and shelter, workforce development in response to the epidemic. They're also kind of changing how they're processing applications. So before, it might have been, oh, submit this 5-page application, and yes, we do need 2 years of an audit, but given what is happening, they may say, you know what, don't send the audit, just send your financial statements. And instead of 5 pages, now it's just 2 pages. This is really in response to the pressure that nonprofit organizations are under because of COVID-19, the reduction in staff, but you do have to also take it from the other side that foundations also have had a reduction in staff. They also are working from home. And so it's an attempt to help manage your capacity, but also to help them manage their capacity as well. Also, I want you guys to really know that there are continued discussions of how foundations should respond. Some foundations have come out with some guidance of how they will respond. Some folks are still kind of forming their opinions. So it's really key to make sure that you're tuned into their websites, and if sign up to their newsletters. If you do have a contact there, definitely stay in communication with them, because there's a lot of things that are coming down the pipeline because people are stepping up to support nonprofit organization in this time of crisis. After this webinar, I do have a list of community foundations by state that are stepping up and answering the call. So that's something that I'll definitely share later on. As far as federal government, the opportunities with the federal government are expanding exponentially. There are going to be so many things. There's things coming down the pipeline as we speak, and also things coming down going forward, especially in areas specifically impacted by COVID-19. One example will be telemedicine. If your nonprofit organization has anything to do with medicine and potentially can take advantage of that, that's an opportunity. You do see, I'm just, just from what I'm reading, expansion in telework options is an option too. Medical research, we're still trying to figure out how to come up with a vaccine for coronavirus. And so that's an opportunity for additional research for coronavirus, but medical research in general. And of course, if you're a nonprofit organization providing food or helping the homeless or unemployment, there's opportunities in that space as well. So I think we are at the point where we're going to start talking about some potential strategies. And again, this is just very practical things that you can take away from this webinar and implement in your nonprofit organization to help you not only survive COVID-19, but thrive through COVID-19. So we're going to turn it back over to LaKeesha to get her insight on some specific strategies. And as soon as LaKeesha's done, we'll immediately have Viveka give her insight as well.
Okay. Well, let's start with the FEMA funding. There are 3 programs that are going to be available specific to COVID-19 based on FEMA funding. You have the CDC Coronavirus Preparedness Act. You have the EMPA and public assistance. Most grant agencies and cities have already received, and nonprofit organizations have already received emails from your state departments of emergency management to go into the online system and request to be included in public assistance. The things that you are going to track, they are paying for transportation. These are all under Category B, if you're familiar with the FEMA funding. Under Category B, that will be transportation for evacuation purposes. If you have, say, down here in the Fort Lauderdale area, we have a assisted living facility right now that is a hotbed for COVID-19. If there is a need for that local government to go in and help with evacuating them, that will be something that will be eligible under the FEMA funding. You want to look at the overtime that you're paying to your police officers to be out making sure that people are abiding by the different restrictions that your local municipalities are putting into place. If you are going to contract with a security agency to support your police department, that will be eligible under funding. Another thing that's new that's going to be eligible potentially is childcare services for your first responders. Many of the states are still trying to figure out what is going to be required for that, but that's something that's potentially eligible, so you want to track that. If you're having to purchase barriers and equipment, if you have to purchase water or supplies to distribute out to people, if you're purchasing meals to distribute, if you have set up, say, a hotline to help with answering calls and fielding calls, and that costs something to you all, you want to make sure that you're tracking that, you're tracking the calls that are coming in. If you need to procure something, you want to make sure that you're tracking that procurement process. If it is a small purchase, then you can follow your own state's procurement processes. But if you're getting into those larger purchases, those $150,000, $250,000 in expenses, you want to make sure that you're tracking your procurement process and that you're including those federal requirements in that procurement. That's the most difficult part about an emergency situation, is that there's usually not a lot of time to go through the whole federal procurement process to be able to get that funding. But FEMA will be looking closely at that when they start to distribute those funds to you all. So make sure tracking is key. If you have people that are working from home, but they're activated and you're paying them, say, time and a half or overtime to be there at your city hall working, that will be an eligible expense under FEMA, along with the meals for those people that you're providing to. So that's one thing with FEMA that you want to look at. And what will happen is, after we kind of get back to business as normal, the FEMA representatives in your area will reach out to you if you have signed up under the public assistance program, and they will set up a meeting to go over your expenses with you to see what expenses you have that meet that threshold. And then at that point, you will begin to input all of your expenses into the tracking system so that you can start the process of getting your reimbursement requests. Going back to the CDBG-DR, I feel that, and I think that this goes even beyond the CDBG-DR, is this is a time for you all to start to look at how can you work with other agencies that have similar needs that you have and pair up. And this collaboration goes beyond the, can you provide me a letter of support for my program? This is, how can we pair up to submit this application together and have a greater impact? The funding that is coming down, those large boats of money, they want to have big impact. They don't want to provide services or to provide funding for a small project that really is neighborhood based. If you have a drainage project and it is in an evacuation zone, and that roadway or that evacuation zone goes across municipal barriers, then you should be partnering with that neighboring municipality to see how you all can come together, what match funding you all can come up with, and how you can work together to get that construction project submitted and built. This is also the time for you all to start looking at the actual costs and moving your projects beyond a good idea. We need data, outcome measures, exactly how much are you doing, where is it going to go, what have you put into it already, how close can you get that project to being shovel ready, or at least ready to go into design? Is your planning completed? That's across the board as well. Even if you're doing a social service agency, this is a social service program for youth programming or anything like that. You want to really start looking at those strong outcome measures, and you want to start collecting the data to see, what has this cost you? How many calls are you getting in? How many children do you have that are food insecure? How many homes, how many people do you have that are now filing for unemployment benefits? If you can track that data, that is invaluable to you, which brings us to making sure that you are pushing the Census 2020. We need to get those numbers. Those numbers for census determines how $1.5 trillion is spent and how that trickles down to our local communities. If your numbers are low, we have to live with those low numbers for 10 years. So I know that we've got our focus off from the census, but it's so important to still make sure you're sending out that message and still promoting and doing what you can to promote people filling out their census and turning it in. The U.S. Census has also set up a link that's live on their website right now, where you can go in and you can see how your community is doing as far as those numbers are concerned. So don't get so wrapped up in COVID that we're forgetting about the things that direct how money comes into our local community. And that starts at the federal level, at least, with making sure that we have good census numbers for our area. The next thing that you want to start doing is determining what can you do right now. Pulling out your current funding applications. Many states, our fiscal year ends in June. So, and we may have grants that are sunsetting. How are those projects doing? Do you need to submit a request for an extension to give you more time to finish that project? Do you need to submit a budget modification request? Do you need to look at your outcomes and your work plans and proactively propose a new set of outcomes and work plans to your funder? The more proactive you are, the better your funder will feel about moving forward with you in the future. You want to make sure that you maintain that positive relationship with your funder, and you're not submitting requests for changes and updates at the last minute when the funder is probably bombarded with everyone else that they have to submit those requests for. If your funding is federal funding through the state or directly from the federal government, and you have expenses that you need to spend and your project is going to sunset soon, spend the money. If it's purchasing the supplies that you need to purchase, spend the money, and you can worry about some of those outcome measures later. You can have that conversation, but you don't want to say that I am going to stop spending my money because we're in this COVID disaster, because we don't know if the federal government is going to say, okay, well, if you haven't spent your money yet, we're just going to go ahead and recapture this money because we need to redirect that money. If they've spent $2 trillion today, and it was what, $8 billion earlier this month, and we don't know how many more billions of dollars they're going to spend, that money has to come from somewhere. And the quickest thing is to look at the money that they've already distributed and allocated that has not been spent, that they can recapture. And the second quickest way is to look at those programs that maybe we can cut. Here in Florida, last year, parks were cut. The Parks Department, the Florida Department of Recreation, they did not receive their FERDAP funding last year. This year they're in the budget, and we hope that they stay in the budget, but last year they were cut from the budget because money was being redirected to water resources. So it's going to have to come from somewhere. We don't know where that's going to land and where that's going to come, but the indicator is, what is your governor and what are the federal government's priorities at the moment? And that'll kind of tell you, here the priority is water related and disaster mitigation. If it's not that, then pretty much that funding is at risk of being cut, in my opinion.
Wow. Wow. That's really interesting. Viveka, do you have any ideas on potential strategies?
Yeah, I really want to kind of shift the focus a little bit. And LaKeesha did a great job of kind of talking about the fiscal planning, which is so important, right? The survivability of most of the nonprofits depend upon whether or not, a lot of that, those funds are going to continue to flow. But I want to focus on 4 areas here. One, for you, and we may have been doing this a little bit over the last couple of weeks, but I can guarantee you that there's still much that needs to be done as weeks come along. With the understanding that COVID-19, although a lot of us have applied social distance practices, maybe even let go of our staff from a layoff perspective, or even just let them, go home. But I want to make sure that we all realize that care for your employees is important. We all have to be human. The first thing you have to do is communicate. Remember that people exhibit anxiety in different ways, and they respond to even the organizations based upon what is and is not communicated. Most employees trust their employers, and so it's important that we do the right thing by our employees from their perspective. sometimes, you kind of think, oh, I'm trying to figure out whether or not I should react or whether or not I should kind of stay calm. But I think, especially in the case of COVID-19, our employees will be gracious when it comes to our overreactions. But what's more important is being proactive. So let's, ensure that, we're definitely keeping our employees abreast of everything. And that's difficult, especially when you're talking about a pipeline that, of large organizations that comes from the top all the way down to the administrative staff, kind of how to deploy those and disseminate those communications. But it really is important. And we can kind of, chat more about this a little bit later. I want to kind of give us a whole lot of time to kind of talk about this in the Q&A section. So I'm kind of roll through these. The next piece of that, which is really important, is caring for your stakeholders. We want to make sure that we're kind of, being gentle with our asks, that we are kind of obviously understand that they're in the same predicament. I know that it's so, important for us to kind of solidify, what's going to happen, especially when we're talking about, grants and awards. But it really is important to understand that our foundations have, employees too, that they also am impacted by COVID-19. We need to really be also thinking about being transparent with them. We want to let them know exactly what's going on, but we have to be gentle about that as well. We want to show them that we care. So we have to be very gentle about that. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we're clearly communicating with them, let them know what our needs are. But I want to stress that we have to make sure that that is done in a very gentle way. And, based upon that feedback that you may get gently when you have that conversation with your stakeholders, let's make sure that we kind of start thinking about alternatives for those, because, what may have been access of funds today or 2 weeks before COVID may not be there anymore. I've seen a lot of organizations shift their funds in response to COVID-19, quite frankly. It's the environment necessitates it. And so some of those, things that we were banking on, or maybe even some of those things that we, have put into our budget that we were told that we were going to have access to, may not be coming down the pipeline for us anymore. Next thing I want to think about, kind of going back again to business continuity, planning for that, it's important that we kind of think about how we're going to survive the next day, what's going to happen after COVID-19. And not just kind of sitting on the sidelines and thinking about, what has transpired thus far. So it's really important. I would advise in this capacity for us to kind of think about workforce disruption. What is that? What impact has that had on the organization? Have we had to let employees telework? Have we had to let employees go in response to maybe some of those funders telling that those opportunities may not be available, whether or not some of those employees are actually even going to be able to come back. Also kind of thinking about some of those contractual agreements too, when it comes to business continuity. What is it that we've spoken for? We put our name out there for, sign the name, and what the flexibility is around those contractual agreements that we have. I was on the line with a client a few days ago, just talking just about that. What does that mean? Whether or not we felt like they were going to be flexible with those contracts. So definitely making sure that we are planning for that in terms of our business operations. And this is from, this quite frankly could be something that we're employing for nonprofit, foundation, government, small business, et cetera. So it's across the board, this business continuity is important. This is probably one of the most important pieces that I want to stress in terms of business continuity. Every organization is going to have some capacity pressure as a result of what's going on too. So we need to kind of, plan for that, identify that. What is that going to look like for us? Whether or not we're going to have to, do things a little bit differently as a result of that pressure. And how do we even think about how we kind of mitigate that pressure as a result of some different plans that we have to put in place? And then lastly, again, kind of thinking about scenario planning. All of this is possible if we start, even though I feel like a lot of organizations feel like scenario planning at this point is kind of apropos. It is, we've already kind of hit COVID-19, but trust me, things could get worse. There are so many other factors that are going to be impacted with your organization. You need to start planning for them. You need to start thinking about the what ifs. What will happen? How will we respond? on. In particular, I talked to several organizations who were talking about crisis communications plan. Nobody put crisis communications plan in place because, who thought? But even in response to COVID-19, as we're seeing those numbers of those infected rise, this could be 14 days, this could be 5 months. So we need to really be thinking about like what happens next and kind of go back to those same 3 things I said before, thinking about programming, thinking about communication, then planning. And we'll definitely talk about this a little bit later, but I want to make sure that we all kind of think about those 4 different areas.
Well, thank you, Viveka. You really touched on a lot of really, really important strategies that I think it's a lot of people will be able to take a lot away from that. I will kind of share some strategies that nonprofit organizations, whether you have current funding now or are looking for future funding, that you can really take advantage of. Melanie Frazier, I did get your question, so I'm hoping that some of these strategies will answer that question that you just sent me. So if you have current funding, it's really important to contact your funder. LaKeesha referenced this in her remarks as well. It's really important because you want to explain any hardships that you're going through, and you want to inquire about any additional monies that are available. There might be some opportunities for a funder to say, hey, even though you got this direct services grant to support your programs, given COVID-19, we can now potentially convert this grant to an unrestricted grant or allow you certain expenses that are unrestricted to keep your nonprofit going over the next few months. So it's really about being proactive, reaching out, being honest with your funders and your donors about what you need, right? And I'll get more into individual donors in a second, because you have to be very tactful of how you share that information with your donors given the current environment. You also want to really look at your budget and consider streamlining it. Have a meeting with your board of directors and go through it line by line and really ask yourself, is this an expense that's absolutely needed at this point? And really think through that, have conversations about that, and to really think through, okay, what do we need right now to survive? And then at what point do we want to go back to status quo? Even if it's 6 months from now, 12 months from now, having that conversation is very, very beneficial. You also want to inquire, especially if you currently receive funding, if there's any changes in reporting requirements, if there's any changes in deadlines, are they giving you additional time in response to COVID-19 to submit reporting? They do realize that people may not be in their offices, and they may extend deadlines for reporting, or they may ask to do it in a different way. But if you don't know, you just don't know. So be proactive and reach out and figure out if any of that would impact you. You also want to know too that a lot of the funding opportunities that have been released in maybe the last 6 months, whose deadlines are like now and within the next 30 days, those deadlines have been extended. So if there was a grant opportunity that you looked at a month ago, 2 months ago, and said, oh my gosh, we don't have the capacity to do it, we don't have the time, you may want to kind of reconsider that, follow up, and really go back to the RFP or go back to the link on their website and see if the deadline has been extended. If you do have additional capacity that's freed up because now that you're working remotely or it's different changes, it might be the opposite for some people. They might have less capacity now. But if you do find yourself in a position where you have more capacity, you might be able to go after that grant that you didn't think you'd be able to apply for. So definitely find out if there have been some extensions. I know there's a lot of grants that I'm doing for my clients right now. The deadlines have been extended. I'm smiling for a reason, very happy that they've been extended, because now it gives us additional time to prepare. Or if I was having conversations with other clients that felt like they didn't have enough time, now they do. So that definitely is a very, very good thing. You also want to look at your programs. Look at and consider, are my programs currently servicing the people that I'm intended to serve given COVID-19? And are there opportunities to expand? And so if you are, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a really good example. If you're providing workforce development opportunities to victims of domestic violence, and at this point, if you were just only maybe doing classes or courses, maybe taking a step further and maybe doing some additional services for your target audience, or maybe collaborating with someone else to provide additional services, or taking those classes that you are offering in person online. So those are just some ways of diversifying your programs, either expanding your reach, deepening your reach through collaboration, or just being very thoughtful about what your audience needs. You also want to really think about, I don't know how many art-based nonprofit organizations that we have on this call, but the arts has always been its kind of own animal, right? As far as finding funding and doing different things. But I do see some really, really good opportunities. For example, I was listening to NPR this morning, and they had an art-based nonprofit organization that was on there, and they were really talking about how people would no longer purchase tickets to come to the theater to see their productions and different things. And in that same conversation, they were talking about how they turned this crisis into an opportunity, and they explained how they're now offering their performances online, where people can pay to see those same performances that they would have saw in person. So they did two things. Now that people are not attending their services, their performances in person, they're still getting revenue from the folks that can attend online, but they also expanded their revenue base because now anyone in the entire world can see these performances now, right? Before, I'm based in Atlanta. Before, only people that lived in Atlanta that could physically attend their performances, that kind of capped their revenue. So now they've expanded across all 50 states in the world. And so I love that example, because although it's for a arts-based nonprofit organization, I challenge other nonprofit organizations that are not art-based to really think outside the box and think of similar ways. And this definitely won't apply to everyone, because everyone's way of servicing the community is different. It may not be an opportunity, but if you do have the opportunity, really think about that, because now you're broadening your scope and you're broadening your impact. So I definitely wanted to share that information. I will touch on fundraising really, really briefly. Over the course of the last 10 years or so, online fundraising has been a very popular way to raise money. And I think now is an opportunity to look into online fundraising even more, not necessarily to expect a lot during this period, but really kind of put yourself in position that when things do start to change, you have an infrastructure in place and a way to engage potential funders. So really thinking through, what online fundraisers can we do? Let's really lay out a plan. What tools do we need to do that? And really starting to have those structures in place, so when things do rebound, you're in position to take advantage of it. As far as individual giving, you have to understand that individual giving may not be the same going forward. As I mentioned earlier, when people are out of work, they do not have the capacity to give. And so understanding that it will not be the same, but do know that now is the time to thank your donors for the giving that they have done. This is the time to identify with what they're going through as far as COVID-19 and challenges in their life related to some of the challenges and things that you guys are going through with your nonprofit organization, and keep them engaged and let them know what your plans are, what you want to do, and what your needs are. And in communicating those needs, it's not so much to communicate in a way of give me money, but it's really just letting them know, because outside of money, there are other opportunities that they may be able to help you. In-kind donations is another kind of support. People that may not be employed right now, but have a skill set, they may be able to provide their skill set as a service to you as a volunteer, but if they don't know that's the area of need, there's no way to really connect the resource to the opportunity. So definitely let them know what you need, but don't do it in a way that you're kind of asking, oh, you gave $5 last year, can you give $10 this year? That might not be the most appropriate thing to do at this time. You also, as far as the federal grant space, you want to make sure that you are registered in grants.gov. And I know for many on this call, this may be just common sense who wouldn't be registered. But for many people who are looking to take advantage of the federal opportunities that are available, you have to be registered in grants.gov. And the reason why I bring that up is because it can be a 6-week process, which may be longer given COVID-19 and maybe not having the capacity to process everything. It does start with having a DUNS number and then registering in SAMS, and then finally it is confirmed in grants.gov. But that entire process does involve engaging with 3 different federal entities, and it is a process. And so if you're not already registered, I encourage people to do that now, because the worst thing is to find a federal grant opportunity specifically geared towards your nonprofit organization. It's a great fit, and you cannot apply because you're not registered. The deadline may be 3 weeks from now, and you're not able to even submit an application because it takes 6 weeks to do it. So that might be very basic for most, but I really do call attention to that, especially as more federal opportunities are available. So definitely grants.gov is the place to go for federal grant opportunities. You can go to specific agency websites and get more information, but if you want like the one place to go to and find all the government opportunities that are available, especially the ones that are forecasted, grants.gov is the place to go. So be sure that you subscribe so when things do come down the pipeline that you can receive it in your inbox. You also want to make sure, and LaKeesha touched on this too, kind of document any impact that COVID-19 has had on your organization and on your target audience that you serve. You want to make sure that that's a part of your story as you're writing grants, to say, this person was impacted by COVID-19. This is what we did, and this was the outcome. So you want to track those, not just for tracking purposes, but to tell your story, especially in a grant application. So now it is 12:50. We have about 10 minutes for a little bit of Q&A. And I think I am okay with unmuting you folks. We have a lot of people on the line, but I do want to give an opportunity for people to either ask a question via the chat box. Oh, we have to mute. Okay, we're going to mute. We're going back to muting. So if you do have a question, definitely pose it in the chat box, and I will be able to share some information. So we have the first question. Okay, very good question. So Tara's asking, talking about cancellation of special events and updating sponsors about postponed events. How can you recoup those funds in a short amount of time for the first and second quarter? So there's so many, and Viveka and LaKeesha, if you have any thoughts, feel free to chime in. There's so many ways. Gosh, this is such a loaded question. I don't know where to start with this, but I am involved with a cancellation of a fundraiser that's happening now. And the good thing is everyone muted? I hear some noise in the back.
If everyone could post their questions and just into the main chat opposed to directly to you, so that we can kind of be thinking about it while you're talking or while she's talking. That way everyone will benefit from it.
Yeah, some came in privately, but yeah, if you guys can post to everyone, that would be awesome. So the cancellation of special events. So I know there's a few opportunities to just move the deposit from one date to the next without any penalty. Of course, you have to negotiate that. As far as people purchasing tickets, I don't know, really just kind of like in a nonprofit world, people know that they're purchasing tickets for a fundraiser, and most people won't ask for refunds. And so you have to kind of manage that process, especially if there's a ticket before the event. If it's an on-site fundraiser where you're expecting to raise funds kind of on site, that really speaks to what Viveka was saying earlier about looking at your budget, and if there's any lost income that you were expecting to bring in, to just kind of come up with a new plan of how to recoup that lost income, whether it's an online fundraiser or anything else that you can do, maybe a fourth quarter to make up for that loss of income. So it really comes down to planning as far as that question.
What was that question, Shavonn? Just if you could just kind of reread it, because I actually had two private and charter school that have had similar scenarios, but I just didn't hear the question.
Yeah, so the question is, can you speak to the cancellation of special events? We have updated our sponsors and postponed events, but how can we recoup those funds in the short term for the first and second quarter?
So I'll give you a scenario in terms of how to handle the communications piece of it, and then in terms of recouping the funds, I really think that, as Shavonn mentioned, kind of really thinking about how you're going to plan, especially if you talked about. I'm not certain if we're talking about first and second quarter. Moving forward, if you're thinking about, kind of looking at those funds being shown as actuals for this year. But let me just kind of go through a quick little scenario here. The first thing you need to do is as Shavonn said, try to reschedule. Everyone is going through COVID-19, from hotels to venues to caterers to bands, etc. Especially if these are your major annual events. We have now likely are going to cancel or postpone the Olympics, right? So it doesn't get much larger than that. And so I certainly feel like that should be your plan B. I'll tell you what I've told a few organizations. You should have a plan B, C, and D. You should always have a contingency plan, which goes back to the whole planning piece. Making sure that whenever you're talking to your vendors, give them 3 dates. Start now. Don't think about, oh, well, it may be 4 weeks, it may be 8 weeks. Think about it may be 12 or 16 or 18, and how that's going to look out. I guarantee you that most vendors, in terms of their ability to kind of reschedule what's going to happen, in terms of recouping, kind of thinking about those funds being encumbered for this quarter, I wouldn't even consider that. I think that for you, that's something that I would just kind of kick that can on down the road and kind of look at encumbering those funds in the third or even maybe fourth quarter or even the beginning of the year next year. But in terms of that event, move forward with it if you can, because obviously, your those individuals that are looking forward to the event, they still want to look forward to it. And I guarantee you, after COVID-19, everyone is going to be interested in doing a little bit of, R&R.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We have another question that came in, which is a great question about if nonprofits are considered small businesses category through the federal funds. I'll have Viveka take this question, and then I'll have some thoughts to share.
So as of right now, the SBA has allocated about $8 billion for nonprofits and small business owners. So although the SBA typically does not qualify nonprofits as small business, in this climate, they actually are. So hopefully that answered your question. So nonprofits right now are considered as small businesses for the allocation of these emergency funds. And there is a website, which is SBA/disaster, where you can go in and apply for those funds.
Awesome. So we have 5 minutes left on the call. I just want to quickly share 2 takeaways. So you guys in the chat box have received AFP's COVID-19 resource guide, and the Grant Professionals Association also has a resource guide. And so these are 2 resources from professional organizations that you all can use going forward to help you get through this time. Some questions you guys might have, are there specific foundations that will help with funding? I'm happy to share just some community foundations that I'm aware of that are giving funding away post-call. And I do want everyone to know that this webinar is being recorded, so you all will receive a recording of this. And so, if you weren't able to take everything down, you will receive a recording. I do have the slide up with our names and organizations Viveka and LaKeesha, if you want to drop your contact information in the chat box, if people want to continue to have a dialogue with you or have any additional questions. I feel like there's probably so much more we could have talked about on this call today, but we're unfortunately at the end of our time. And so, ladies, do you have any final remarks that you'd like to share before we kind of just go about our day?
Yeah, this was a phenomenal space to kind of share this information. I do want to, from my perspective, leave with one thing that you really didn't get a chance to touch upon. But, obviously, there likely are multiple calls. I want to make sure that you all understand the importance of collaboration. There are a lot of organizations out there, i.e., small businesses and medium-sized business, or just corporate America right now, that really are looking for your organization or some of your organizations to kind of help in response to COVID-19. I'm not sure what space everyone is in, but, kind of think about those collaborations from a social enterprise and social impact perspective. They're looking for you right now. This is the perfect climate for you. So don't give up on those collaborations that actually may end up turning into lasting relationships.
And for me, I would suggest looking at your continuity of operation plans. I expect that funders will begin to reach out to see what you did if you're not already communicating with them, but also start looking at what kind of policies and procedures you need to put in place to cover these types of disasters moving forward. If you don't already have a continuity of operations plan, you want to develop that. And if you do have one, go back and look at it. How did you all line up with the continuity of operations plan? Where were the gaps that need to be filled, and make sure that you're getting that information to your funders as well moving forward.
Awesome. Well, thank you, ladies, for your time. Thank you, everyone that has attended. Our contact information is in the chat box again, if you guys have any additional questions or want to continue the dialogue. So I will ask that everyone drop off at this time, and I need the speakers to stay on for about 2 to 3 minutes. Thank you for your time.